If you're into games with challenging and sometimes brutal, fast-paced combat, there's an upcoming title that you just might want to keep on your radar. Death of a Wish is an action RPG that encourages you to fight your way through enemies in style in a world that is very much engulfed in a bleak and oppressive atmosphere. That atmosphere is coupled with a story of revenge centered around an adorable little 2D protagonist with a thirst for vengeance. My name's Johnny Bueno, and let's take a look at Death of a Wish. So, as I mentioned, Death of a Wish is very much a story of revenge. This story is centered around our little pal Christian, or Chris as he prefers to be called, and his mission to destroy the Four Faiths. The Four Faiths consist of the Cardinal, the Priest, the Sister, and the Father, and they oversee a religious order known as the Sanctum, who very much contribute to the oppressive atmosphere seen throughout the various locales of the game. Chris has some history with the Sanctum, particularly a close relationship with the Father, and this is touched on throughout the game as he encounters his various nemesis. If you couldn't tell by now, based on the names of the characters, there's some obvious religious undertones that are prevalent in the game's story. Themes of guilt, trauma, friendship, and sacrifice accompany those undertones to make for what feels like an often dark, yet very emotional plot centered around Chris's journey. There's much more to this revenge plot than meets the eye, but I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. Graphically, Death of a Wish features a fairly unique 2D art style that almost looks like a rough sketch someone would draw in their notebook during a fever dream. The environments, characters, and even your own in-game map all appear to be crudely drawn in a way that makes everything feel chaotic and almost ethereal in a way. I will say, it's somewhat jarring at first, but you definitely get used to it after the first hour or so of gameplay. In some cases, I did find it hard to identify which parts of the environment were interactable or traversable, like a sidewalk that looked oddly like a wall. But this didn't happen too often to really make a fuss about, or maybe I'm just getting old and my old man eyes are just straining to make sense of what I'm seeing. Jokes aside, overall I think the graphical style is definitely suited for an experience that feels more or less like a chaotic dream. As bleak as the setting is though, I did like the game's use of color to identify friend and foe and how they appear against the dark backdrop of the world. Enemies are almost always red, with characters of interest often being orange and close allies appearing blue. It's a simple touch, but it makes everything easily identifiable, which comes in handy when you're either zipping around the map or in the midst of battle. And on the topic of battles, combat in Death of a Wish feels very, well, Souls-like. I know, people have a tendency to throw around the S word for any game that features semi-difficult bosses and some form of dodge rolling. But there are a lot of similarities with the genre between that, limited use healing, sporadically placed rest points, and enemies that respawn every time you use those rest points, so I find it hard not to draw a comparison. However, the developers don't explicitly call the game a Souls-like, so I won't either. Back to combat though, Death of a Wish has a very fast-paced, aggression-focused approach that had me sweating profusely on several occasions. You can perform light attacks and heavy attacks along with a special charge attack by holding down the heavy attack button. Parries can also be performed by dodging toward an enemy just as they're about to land an attack. Through consistent attacking and parrying, your main goal is to deplete an enemy's yellow guard bar, temporarily stunning them and forcing them to take critical damage with every hit. So when I say the game is aggression focused, I mean you are heavily rewarded for remaining aggressive in a fight through consistently laying on attacks while timing your parries just right. If you can master the combat system, some boss fights will almost feel like straight bullying, as you can break their guard surprisingly fast as long as you're constantly in their face. However, it's not always that easy, as many encounters often have several enemies you'll need to engage at once. I generally found the one-on-one encounters to not be too troubling when trying to get my parries down right, but things can get out of hand pretty quick when you're facing groups of melee and ranged enemies. Suddenly, you're trying to parry attacks while also dodging projectiles. It can often be tough to make sense of what's going on when you're being assaulted from all sides. Maybe it's just me, but the graphical style didn't really help, as the abundance of effects flashing across the screen all at once caused me to lose the place of where my character is amongst the madness. So while aggression is the name of the game, there's definitely still occasions where you'll need to consider maintaining some distance and attacking exactly when the time is right. There's also something incredibly satisfying about clearing a difficult encounter and watching Chris point at the screen in triumph like some sort of JoJo character. How you attack your enemies is dictated by which aria you have equipped. Arias essentially modify how Chris performs his light, heavy, and charge attacks, and each one comes with unique effects. For example, Sol, the aria Chris starts out with, increases damage with successive attacks. Aqua provides some crowd control capabilities through freezing and slowing down enemies. You can equip two arias at once, and they can be swapped on the fly, allowing you to string together some pretty impressive combos when utilizing both arias to their fullest potential. And if that wasn't enough, arias can be combined to create resonances, adding the effects of both into a single powerful aria. An example of this would be combining Sol with Anima, which creates the Angelus Resonance. This resonance augments Sol's combo potential with Anima's speed, leading to a very close quarters focused playstyle. Resonances open up an incredible number of different playstyles, and it was fun to mix and match arias to find the most overpowered combos possible. You can also attach a little buddy known as a familiar to your arias who serve as your ranged attack option in battle. There's a number of different familiars you can collect throughout the game, and they come with attacks that range from fairly useful to completely broken, so I would recommend exploring everything the game has to offer as to not miss out on these useful little guys. Now, I've mentioned all of the tools you have in your arsenal to master Death of a Wish's combat, and there's actually an in-game system that further encourages you to do just that. You're graded for your performance in every combat encounter, and the higher grade you receive for your performance, the more corruption is burned away from Chris. Chris's corruption level is indicated by the percentage shown in the top right corner of the screen, and it increases during combat and when you die. If your corruption reaches 100%, well, that's it, it's game over. So you're encouraged to somewhat consistently perform well in combat to keep your corruption as low as possible. From what I could tell, mixing up your attacks and clearing an encounter quickly can net you a higher score, as well as taking no damage. This might sound stressful, but I didn't find it overly difficult to manage. I think by the end of the game, I hadn't even surpassed 50% corruption at any point during my playthrough, though you still need to be careful and not rack up too many deaths. A great way to avoid death and subsequently erase your corruption is utilizing rewinds. These essentially take the place of your rechargeable healing item featured in most Souls-like style games. Rather than simply healing your missing health, you'll immediately be taken back to the start of the encounter to try it again. This is actually a pretty smart way to repeat an encounter several times over for a high rank without constantly dying and screwing over your corruption level, especially when it comes to the game's boss fights. You can collect more standard healing items called health essences, though these do not regenerate like rewinds, are limited in use, and need to be found in the world instead. So you're really encouraged to learn mechanics and avoid damage instead of brute forcing your way through a fight by spamming healing items. I was a big fan of this system, even if I had to use my rewinds far more often than I'd like to admit. As far as powering up Chris goes, you'll gain experience through defeating enemies and by picking up items found in the world. Once you've collected enough experience, you'll earn works, which can be used to increase Chris's 5 main stats. Health is self-explanatory, while power increases physical damage, charge increases charge attack damage, mind increases aria effects, and sync increases familiar damage. It's important to keep in mind that the various arias you collect will skill differently with each stat, with some favoring power and some favoring mind. So you'll of course need to keep a general build in mind when upgrading Chris's stats. Since there's only 5 stats though, you really don't have to worry too much about messing up your build beyond knowing what stats scale with your preferred arias. I spread my stats out between everything besides mind, and I really didn't feel like I made a bad stat investment at any point in the game, although I'm sure you'll need to have a much tighter build when playing on higher difficulties. A few other ways to customize and power up Chris is through the different virtues discovered and picked up in the world. These provide passive bonuses regardless of the aria you have equipped, including increased parry effectiveness or the ability to recover health through dealing damage. You're free to pick the best virtues that fit your playstyle, however you are limited in how many you can equip at one time. Each virtue costs a certain number of virtue points, and you need to be rather selective as to not exceed your current virtue point limit. This limit can be increased through finding rosaries, which in turn will allow you to equip more virtues. Similar to virtues, you can also collect prayer cards, also found through exploration, which are equipped to your aria loadouts. These are more offense focused and can provide bonuses like increased aria attack range or increased guard damage. Unlike virtues, you'll need to take into consideration how well the passive bonuses offered by a specific prayer card meshes with your arias. Between the various virtues and prayer cards you can collect, there's a great deal of build diversity to experiment with on top of deciding which arias and familiars to use in your loadout. You're also encouraged to fully explore each area and complete as many side quests as possible to find these, as many are easily missable if you're not paying attention. All things considered, Death of a Wish is an incredibly compelling action RPG, both in terms of its satisfying yet brutal combat and its dark yet thought-provoking story beats. It's a title that really encourages you to fight with style with an incredibly high skill ceiling, and I'm excited to see how people master it. I'd argue it's one of the more memorable titles I've played so far this year, and I highly recommend checking out the demo linked in the description of this video if you're interested. That's all for now though, so if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like or sharing your thoughts on Death of a Wish in the comments below. I appreciate every bit of interaction and support, as I love making videos just like this one. So please consider subscribing to support the channel, and as always, thank you for watching.